In today's society, many families see the completion of their children's education as sending them to college or university. Some young people take what's called a gap year, where they perhaps go abroad for a year between finishing all their school examinations and starting again at college. In the 18th century, instead of a gap year, young men took what came to be known as the Grand Tour, learning about the politics, the culture and the art of mainland Europe. This house is very much influenced by the Grand Tour. The three generations of the family, largely responsible for the art collection, the third, fourth and fifth Earls of Carlisle, each toured Europe. Italy was a favourite destination on the Grand Tour, with its heritage of ancient Roman monuments. The British, in particular, were attracted by such monuments as the Colosseum in Rome, and such wonders of nature as the volcanic eruptions of Mount Vesuvius near Naples. The fourth Earl particularly collected antique sculpture, but he also purchased paintings, and he commissioned 6 Roman Capriccios from the artist Giovanni Paolo Pannini during his second visit to Italy in 1738. I've just used this word, capriccio, and hope you can learn and remember it. Capriccio is an Italian term that's most commonly used to describe a type of picture in which real objects are combined with imaginary ones, or are shown with their locations put together to form an imaginary setting, rather in the way you might make a collage at school. Pannini's fanciful Roman scenes, extremely popular in the 18th century, included figures of grand tourists and the buildings and sculptures that they had gone to see. So, in the way we might buy a postcard or take a photograph today, these scenes were regarded as souvenirs of all the monuments of classical antiquity that the young aristocrats had most admired on their tour. Pannini was born in 1691 in Piacenza in Italy. After training in the School of Stage Designers at Bologna, he went to Rome and studied figure painting. He became known as a fresco painter, a method of wall painting in which the paint is applied to wet plaster, making the picture an integral part of the wall. But he is most famous for his architectural pictures and views of towns, and he was the first artist to make a special feature of ruins. The works we're about to examine are similar in style and subject matter, and have been enlivened and made interesting by the numerous figures he has included. This painting shows 2 of the most famous ancient monuments in Rome, the Colosseum and the Arch of Constantine. The Colosseum was an elliptical-shaped amphitheatre holding about 50,000 spectators in 3 tiers of stands. Spectacles such as gladiatorial combats and fights with beasts were held in the Colosseum. The Arch of Constantine was built to commemorate the Emperor Constantine's victory in a battle. In the foreground are some very famous statues. The Borghese gladiator. Next to him, the dying Gaul. And to the right, part in shadow, the Medici lion. Such sculptures were much admired by the grand tourists. However, the Earls of Carlisle were not content to have just a pictorial reminder of classical Rome. They took their memories of the grand tour a stage further. They bought copies of some of these sculptures, made in marble, bronze, lead or plaster. Many of them can be found here, in the house or in the grounds. These paintings would have been an inspirational influence on the Howard family. Just as I am encouraging you to visit the wonderful treasures in this house, so the paintings were encouraging successive generations of the Howard family to visit the ancient sites depicted here. This large and impressive capriccio is called the Baths of Caracalla. Here on the right in this arcade is the Farnese Hercules. I expect many of you are familiar with the story of the labours of Hercules. Try to find out about the tasks shown here. Hercules is leaning on his club, which is draped with the skin of a lion. In his right hand, held behind his back, he's holding 3 golden apples. 2 versions of this famous statue exist here at Castle Howard. A lead copy in the grounds, purchased by the 3rd Earl in 1723, and a small 16th century bronze, bought by the 4th Earl. The statue in the grounds clearly shows the golden apples held behind his back. In the centre, another of Hercules' labours is shown. It's Hercules fighting the Hydra. This equally large and impressive painting shows a ruined colonnade with antique sculptures. On the left, between a statue of a standing Roman and a statue of the Empress Faustina, is a statue of Hygeia, goddess of health. She's usually shown holding a serpent in one hand and a cup in the other out of which it drinks. A copy of this statue can be seen in the Great Hall, here at Castle Howard, beneath the spectacular dome. On the right is Cincinnatus binding his shoe, Silenus with the infant Bacchus, and the Chasey Juno. I hope you'll follow up with a closer study of some of these characters of ancient mythology. When you visit Castle Howard, you can do some detective work of your own. Study all the Pannini paintings carefully, and then see how many of the features in the paintings you can find in the house and grounds. I've mentioned some of them. I think you'll be surprised at just how many you can find. Antique sculpture was an important part of any collection, but copies were also common. The two corridors here that form the antique passage are lined with pieces, some antique and some copies of antique originals. These were collected mostly by the 4th Earl. His letters with his purchasing agents reveal him arguing over the prices and the quality of particular pieces. The letters are an insight into the practicalities of collecting while on the grand tour. They tell of rivalries, the packing and shipping arrangements, and worries about pirates intercepting the vessels that were to carry the treasures home. Like his father and grandfather before him, the 5th Earl visited Italy. He also commissioned English artists, one of whom was Sir Joshua Reynolds. In fact, he painted the Earl 3 times. Born in Devon in 1723, Reynolds was a writer and lecturer on art, the first president of the Royal Academy, and the leading portrait artist of his day. In this painting by Reynolds, Frederick, 5th Earl of Carlisle, is painted in a classical pose, wearing his robes of the Order of the Thistle. He'd been invested with the Order of the Thistle by the King of Sardinia. Shown against a splendid background of columns and arches, the pose and the setting would have been intended to convey the status and character of the Earl. However, Reynolds has introduced a touch of humour by painting the Earl's pet dog, Rover, at his feet. Perhaps he's barking in anticipation of a walk. We know that Rover accompanied his master on his grand tour, and was, it seems, a very mischievous little dog. In fact, Rover had to have 3 sittings for this painting. I wonder if that's because he wouldn't keep still. Reynolds is often criticised for his experimental techniques. He was renowned for trying things that didn't work very well, and then his pictures deteriorated quickly. This explains why we can't see Rover as clearly as we'd like to. He was probably a German Spitz type of dog. Rover certainly had some adventures when he was on the grand tour, and the Earl referred to him in his letters to England. When travelling through Paris, Rover became lost, but was fortunately found by a servant.
Rover is very well and diverts himself extremely here, but I had near lost him on coming out of Paris.
Rover must have been quite a character, because later on the tour it appears that he was to have his portrait made.
Rover is very well and is perfectly acquainted with Turin. His picture shall be drawn by Pompeo Batroni.
Rover was always getting into scrapes and pushing his luck too far. Sadly, one day his luck ran out. Poor Rover was run over by a coach and killed. As the Earl wrote to his friend, George Selwyn,
My dear George, I must begin with desiring you to condole with me upon the unfortunate end of poor Rover, who was run over by a coach and expired immediately. He was buried in the garden. Ibat et ad stygias, nobilis umbra plagas. Indeed, I am very sorry for him. I never had a dog die a natural death. I will never have another.